The settlement's air turned thick with unease, like the breath before a storm. Emily could feel the weight of every eye on her as she sat tall in her saddle, Cale at her side. The sheriff had stepped back, but the crowd lingered, whispers swirling like dry leaves caught in the wind. Cale's voice was low, meant only for her. "If I stay, they will come for me. For us," Emily tightened her grip on the reins. "Then we'll face them." She didn't know where the strength in her voice came from, only that it rang true. She would not shrink, not after everything. The sheriff raised his hands, trying for calm. "Folks, go on about your business. Ain't no reason for blood to spill today." But not all men listened. From the back of the crowd, a stocky rancher with a weathered face stepped forward, rifle slung across his chest. His eyes burned with a mixture of fear and hatred. "No reason? You letting a redskin ride in here like he belongs, and you call that no reason?" A murmur of agreement rippled through a handful of others. Several shifted uneasily, hands drifting toward the butts of their pistols. Cale sat silent, but his presence radiated like iron, steady and unyielding. Emily knew he could fight, she had seen it, but here, among numbers and prejudice, the odds were stacked high. "Enough!" Emily snapped, surprising even herself. Her voice rang sharp against the tense morning air. "If you want to blame someone, blame the outlaws who terrorized your land and your families. Not the man who stood against them when you weren't there," the rancher sneered. "You talk brave for a woman hiding behind him." Emily's cheeks flushed hot, but she refused to back down. "I'm not hiding. I'm choosing." "There's a difference," the sheriff barked. "That's enough. Burke, put that rifle down before someone regrets it." But Burke didn't lower his weapon. His eyes flicked to Cale. "I say we drive him out now, before he brings more trouble." The motion was so sudden Emily barely saw it, Burke's hand twitching toward his rifle. Cale moved like lightning, dismounting in a fluid motion and knocking the weapon aside before it could be leveled. The two men clashed, Burke staggering under Cale's sheer force. Gasps and shouts erupted. Several townsfolk scattered, while others reached for their guns. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. She slid from her horse and threw herself between Cale and the growing line of rifles. "Stop!" she cried, arms spread wide. "If you fire, you'll hit me first." The crowd froze. The sheriff cursed under his breath. "Damn it, Emily." Burke, sprawled in the dirt, spat blood. "She's lost her senses." Emily stood taller, trembling but unyielding. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just opened my eyes." She turned, looking at every face, every man and woman who had doubted her. "You see a savage. I see the man who gave me his blanket when outlaws stole everything, who stood watch all night so I could sleep, who fought when cowards would have left me to die." Her voice cracked, but her fire didn't dim. "If you can't see that, then maybe the savagery isn't in him, it's in you." The silence that followed was thick as molasses. Some shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. Others looked angry, but unsure. Cale, standing a step behind her, said nothing. His presence spoke louder than words. His strength was not in shouting, but in standing, unflinching, even as the world tried to push him down. Finally, the sheriff exhaled, weary. "That's enough. This town's had its fill of blood feuds. Burke, you take another step, and you'll answer to me." Burke glared, but with the sheriff's hand near his revolver and Emily still blocking the line of fire, he backed down, muttering curses. The crowd slowly dispersed, though suspicion still clung to the air. The sheriff gave Emily one last look, half warning, half respect. "You've made your choice, Miss Whitaker. Best be sure you can live with it." Emily turned to Cale, her pulse still racing, her body trembling with adrenaline. His eyes met hers, dark, steady, but burning with something she had only begun to understand. "I can live with it," she whispered, for the first time. Cale's lips curved just slightly into something close to a smile. The settlement had barely settled into uneasy silence when a new sound shattered the morning calm, the thunder of hooves. Dust rose on the horizon, and Emily's heart sank as she recognized the riders. The outlaws. The very men who had stolen her clothes by the creek now rode boldly into town.
Rifles raised, faces twisted with malice. Whitaker girl.
Their leader bellowed. Thought you could hide behind town walls? Not today. Panic swept the settlement. Women rushed to gather children, men scrambled for rifles. But the outlaws had the advantage. They were ready, armed and hungry for blood. Cale stepped forward, rifle in hand, his presence steady as stone. "Stay behind me," he murmured to Emily, but Emily shook her head fiercely. No, not this time. The outlaws thundered closer, their shots cracking like lightning. Bullets splintered wood, glass shattered, shouts filled the air. Cale dropped to one knee, firing with precision. 2 riders fell before they reached the main street. Emily, heart pounding, seized a fallen pistol near the blacksmith's door. Her hands trembled, but she held her ground. "Emily!" Cale barked. "I won't run," she answered, her voice steady despite the terror in her chest. The outlaws swarmed, dismounting to take cover among wagons and barrels. The sheriff rallied a handful of townsfolk, returning fire, but the outlaws' fury was fierce. One broke toward Emily, knife flashing in the sunlight. Her blood turned cold, but before fear could freeze her, she lifted the pistol and fired. The outlaw crumpled, eyes wide in shock. Emily's breath came ragged, the weight of what she'd done settling heavy, but there was no time. Another charged. Cale intercepted, his rifle swinging like a club, striking the man down. Together, they fought a strange, perfect rhythm neither had rehearsed but somehow knew. Emily covered Cale's flank, her shots wild at first but truer with every breath. Cale moved like a shadow, silent and precise. His every strike meant to protect her. At last, only the leader remained, crouched behind a wagon, his revolver trained on Emily, his sneer cut deep. A white girl standing with an Apache. What would your fine family think? Emily's jaw clenched. They'd thank him for saving me. Over and over again, the outlaw laughed, cruel and sharp. He aimed too fast, too sure. But Cale was faster. His rifle cracked, and the leader fell back, lifeless. The sneer wiped from his face. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of the townsfolk. The dust began to settle. The outlaws were finished. Emily lowered her pistol, her whole body trembling now that the fight was over. Cale stepped to her side, his hand brushing her arm, steadying her. "You fought well," he said quietly, pride glinting in his eyes. Her throat tightened. "Only because you gave me courage." The sheriff approached, his hat in his hands. He looked between them, weariness etched deep in his face. "Seems we all owe you our lives. Both of you." His gaze lingered on Cale, and for the first time it wasn't suspicion in his eyes, but respect. "Reckon I was wrong. Maybe the town can learn something from today." Emily exhaled shakily, relief washing over her. But her eyes sought only Cale's. In the midst of chaos he had been her anchor, her shield, her unspoken promise. "I don't know what comes next," she whispered to him, her hand brushing his, tentative but sure. "But I know I can't turn away from it." "Not from you." For a long moment Cale was silent. Then he reached for her hand, his grip warm, strong, certain. "Where the path leads, we walk it together." The words settled deep in her heart, like an oath. Around them, the town began to stir, tending the wounded, counting the fallen. But for Emily, the world had narrowed to the man beside her. She had come west seeking family, safety, a place to belong. She had found danger, loss, and fear. But she had also found Cale, found love forged in fire and bound by courage. And as the sun climbed higher, Painting the prairie gold, Emily knew she had made her choice, not just for today, but for every dawn yet to come. Together. The first gray light of dawn crept into the cave, brushing the stone walls with pale silver. Emily stirred from a restless sleep, blinking against the glow of the fire that had burned low in the night. She turned and saw Cale still awake, seated near the cave mouth, his rifle across his knees. His silhouette was carved sharp against the morning sky, vigilant, unyielding, as though he were part of the land itself. "You didn't sleep," she whispered, her voice hoarse from slumber. Cale turned slightly, his dark eyes meeting hers. "I told you I would keep watch." Emily pushed herself up, smoothing her tangled hair. "But you need rest, too. You can't carry both our burdens." His gaze softened, though his tone remained firm. "I have carried heavier burdens than this. Do not worry for me." Her chest tightened at the quiet strength in his words. She wanted to argue, but deep down she knew he spoke truth. Cale was made of endurance, shaped by land and hardship in ways she could barely imagine. And yet something in her longed to ease his burden, to offer more than silent gratitude. She rose, stepping closer to the cave mouth. The desert stretched wide before them, washed in gold by the rising sun. The canyon floor lay quiet, but faint dust on the horizon told her the outlaws still searched. "They're still out there, aren't they?" she asked. Cale nodded once. "Men like them do not give up. Pride makes them blind. They will hunt until one side falls." Emily shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "And what if that side is us?" Cale studied her a moment, then said with quiet conviction, "It will not be." The certainty in his voice settled her nerves more than any promise of safety. For a long moment she simply watched him, her heart aching with an emotion she dared not name. Gratitude, yes. Admiration, surely. But there was something deeper, something dangerous, something that had nothing to do with necessity and everything to do with Cale himself. She tore her gaze away, trying to distract herself. "I should fetch water," she murmured, moving toward the small stream trickling outside the cave. But her hands trembled as she filled the canteen, her thoughts racing. What was happening to her? She had come west to find family, to build a new life. She had not expected to find an Apache warrior at her side, much less to feel her heart turn traitor, drawn to him with every passing hour. When she returned, Cale accepted the canteen with a nod. "Good," he said simply, drinking deeply before passing it back. Their fingers brushed. The brief touch sent a shiver through Emily that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. She pulled her hand back quickly, but Cale's eyes lingered on her just long enough to make her breath catch. "We should move soon," he said at last, his tone steady though something flickered beneath it. "The canyon will not hold them long." Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to nod. "Yes." Of course. They packed quickly, Cale efficient as ever, Emily fumbling more than once beneath the weight of her own distracted thoughts. As they mounted their horses, she stole one last glance at him, at the way the rising sun lit his profile, at the calm determination etched into every line of his face, and it struck her then, sharp and undeniable. She was no longer afraid of him. She was afraid of what she was beginning to feel. As they rode out of the canyon, the desert opening wide before them, Emily pressed a hand to her chest, as if she could quiet the pounding of her heart. She told herself it was madness, that it was only gratitude, only relief. But deep down, she knew the truth was far more dangerous. Her heart was no longer entirely her own, and though Cale rode silent at her side, watchful and unyielding, she wondered if he felt the same tug, that invisible thread pulling them closer with every mile. By mid-morning, the desert gave way to rolling hills marked by wagon ruts and fence posts, the first signs of civilization Emily had seen in days. Her heart leapt at the sight. Smoke curled from a chimney in the distance, and the faint outlines of a settlement emerged, nestled against the prairie's edge. "That's it," Emily whispered, pointing eagerly. People, safety. Cale slowed his horse, his expression unreadable. Your people, he said quietly, though not without weight. She glanced at him, startled by the note in his voice. Yes, my people, but that doesn't mean you aren't welcome among them. Cale's gaze lingered on the distant settlement. An Apache is not welcome in many white towns. See only an enemy, a thief, a savage. The word cut deep, though it was not meant for her. Emily's throat tightened. She had heard men use that word too often, laced with hatred. But looking at Cale, his patience, his honor, his unwavering protection, she knew how false it was. I won't let them see you that way, she said firmly. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, something like gratitude, or maybe disbelief. But then he looked away. We will see. As they approached the settlement, heads began to turn. A few men working in fields straightened, gripping tools like weapons. A mother gathering laundry hustled her children indoors. Emily's joy dimmed as suspicion spread like fire. By the time they reached the edge of town, a small crowd had gathered. Emily Whitaker? A voice called. A tall man stepped forward, wearing a sheriff's star on his chest. Relief flooded her, someone she recognized. Sheriff Gaines, she exclaimed. Thank heavens. The sheriff's eyes swept over her, then landed hard on Cale. His jaw tightened. What's the meaning of this? You ridden in here with A. He stopped short of the word, but it hung heavy in the air. Emily straightened in her saddle. This man saved my life. The outlaws you've been chasing, they cornered me. They would have left me with nothing. Cale, she said his name firmly, willing the sheriff and the townsfolk to hear it as human, not foreign. Cale protected me when no one else was there. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some skeptical, some curious, some openly hostile. The sheriff's gaze narrowed. That true? He asked Cale directly. Cale's eyes held steady. Yes, she was alone. They would have harmed her. I stopped them. His words were simple, but his voice carried the weight of unshaken truth. Emily's heart swelled with pride at his calm, defiance. The sheriff rubbed his jaw, torn between law and prejudice. Miss Whitaker, you're welcome here. But I can't say the same for him. Folks here won't take kindly to an Apache ridden into town, no matter what he's done. Emily's stomach twisted. She looked at Cale, at the man who had wrapped her in his blanket, who had stood guard through the night, who had made her feel safe when she thought she would be broken. The thought of letting him ride away alone while she stayed behind in safety felt unbearable. No, she said, her voice ringing clear. If he's not welcome, then I'll go with him. Gasps stirred in the crowd. Even the sheriff's eyes widened. Emily, think carefully. You're talking about leaving your people for... He glanced at Cale, the weight of the unspoken words heavy. For him. Emily lifted her chin. Her heart pounded, but her resolve did not waver. I am thinking carefully. He's risked his life for me more than once. Can any of you say the same? Silence followed. The sheriff shifted uneasily, but no one stepped forward to claim her challenge. Cale's eyes met hers, dark and searching. For the first time, Emily thought she saw something unguarded in them, not just respect, but something deeper, more dangerous. The sheriff finally sighed. Do as you will, Miss Whitaker, but if he stays, there'll be trouble. That much I promise. Emily's choice hung in the air, heavy as the dawn itself. Safety behind whitewashed walls or loyalty to the man who had carried her through the desert, heart and soul alike. And as Cale guided his horse a step closer, silently asking without words if she truly meant what she said, Emily knew the answer would shape the rest of her life. The desert night stretched wide around them, the stars glittering like 1,000 watchful eyes. For a time, the rhythm of hoofbeats and the whisper of wind through mesquite lulled Emily into a fragile sense of peace. She stayed close behind Cale, her mare steady, her dress brushing against the saddle leather. But that peace shattered when the distant thunder of hooves reached her ears. Cale's head snapped up at once. His eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. "They come." Emily twisted in her saddle, her heart lurching. Faint dust rose in the moonlight, a pale smear against the dark sky. Her breath caught. "The outlaws?" "More," Cale said grimly. "They bring others." Fear clenched Emily's chest. Of course the men would return. They had been humiliated by an Apache. Pride would drive them back, and vengeance would fuel their numbers. She glanced desperately at Cale. "What do we do?" His voice was steady, resolute. "We ride." They urged their mounts forward, galloping into the rugged night. The land grew harsher rocky ridges, cactus fields, and twisting gullies that threatened to break a horse's leg if misstepped. Cale guided them with uncanny precision, never faltering, as though he had been born from the desert itself. Emily clung to her mara, her blanket-turned shawl fluttering behind her, fear burning in her chest. Yet amid the terror, a strange exhilaration filled her veins. She wasn't alone. Cale's silhouette led the way, unwavering, a beacon of strength in the darkness. They rode hard until the canyon walls loomed ahead jagged, cliffs rising like black teeth against the sky. Cale slowed, lifting a hand. "Here, we make our stand," Emily's voice broke. "Stand? Against all of them?" Cale dismounted, calm as stone, and led his horse into a narrow pass where the canyon walls pinched close together. "This place is strong," he said. "Only two can ride abreast. Their numbers mean nothing here." Emily slid from her saddle, her legs trembling. "And what of me?" His gaze softened, though his tone stayed firm. "You stay behind the rocks. If I fall, you take the horse and ride south until you find the river." The words pierced her like a blade. "If you fall?" She whispered, throat tight. "Cale, no." He touched her arm briefly, a rare, grounding gesture. "I will not fall. But you must be ready." Before she could answer, the pounding of hooves grew louder, echoing through the canyon walls. Shadows surged into view, the outlaws and their reinforcements, at least half a dozen men, guns glinting in the moonlight. Cale stepped into the narrow throat of the canyon, rifle raised, a lone figure against the tide. His voice rang clear, strong as the cliffs themselves. "Turn back. The canyon is closed to you." The leader sneered, a broad man with a scar slashing across his cheek. "There he is. That Apache dog. Kill him." Gunfire erupted. The canyon exploded with echoes as bullets sparked against stone. Emily dropped behind the rocks, clutching the fabric of her skirt, her heart hammering. She wanted to shut her eyes, but she couldn't look away. Cale moved with deadly grace, each shot deliberate, each step sure. He fired from behind stone, ducked, reloaded, and struck again, forcing the riders back. The narrow pass funneled them, stripping them of advantage. Two horses went down, screaming, throwing their riders into the dust. "Damn him!" The scarred outlaw roared. "Circle and flush him out." But the canyon betrayed them. The walls rose steep and sheer, no room to circle, no cover to flank. Cale's rifle cracked again, and another man fell. Clutching his arm, Emily pressed her hand over her mouth, torn between terror and awe. Cale was one man against many, yet he fought as if the land itself bent to his will. Then silence. The surviving men pulled back, cursing, their leader spitting into the dirt. "We'll be back, Apache. You and your woman ain't seen the last of us." Their hoofbeats faded into the night, swallowed by the desert. Emily's legs gave out, and she sank against the rocks, trembling. Cale strode back to her, reloading calmly as though nothing had passed. He glanced at her pale face, then crouched. "You are unhurt?" She shook her head quickly. "I am fine, but you?" Cale, that was. Her words faltered. Necessary, he said simply. Emily stared at him, her heart pounding not just with fear, but with something deeper, sharper, awe, gratitude, and a dangerous spark of feeling she had no name for. She swallowed hard. You saved me again. Cale held her gaze, his dark eyes steady. I will save you as many times as needed. The night pressed in, the canyon walls towering around them. And though Emily knew danger still hunted them, she also knew something else. Her heart was no longer entirely her own. The night air cooled sharply after the gunfire faded, leaving only silence and the faint scent of gunpowder drifting through the canyon. Emily's heart still hammered from the fight, her body trembling as though the echoes of bullets still rang inside her. Cale checked the canyon mouth once more before returning to her, his movements deliberate, his presence calm despite the storm that had just passed. They will not return tonight, he said. His voice was low, steady, certain. But they will not give up. We must find shelter until dawn. Emily nodded, though her throat felt dry. She pushed herself up, brushing dirt from her skirt. The canyon walls loomed, casting deep shadows. Where can we go? She whispered. Cale led the way, guiding her mare and one of the captured horses along a narrow side path that twisted deeper into the cliffs. The trail was steep, scattered with loose rock, but Cale's sure hand steadied her when she slipped. His touch was brief, just the press of his palm against her arm, but it steadied more than her. Footing. At last they came upon a shallow cave, half hidden by brush and stone. Cale pushed the branches aside, scanning the dark interior before nodding. This will do. Inside, the cave smelled of earth and old stone. It was not large, but deep enough to hide them from prying eyes. Emily sank onto a smooth rock, exhaustion washing over her in waves. Cale set down his rifle, gathered fallen wood from nearby, and soon had a small fire flickering in the center of the cave. Its glow painted his face in shifting amber, casting sharp lines across his strong features. Emily found herself staring before she could stop, then quickly looked away, cheeks warm. He noticed but said nothing. Instead, he passed her a piece of dried meat from his pouch. Eat. Strength will be needed. Emily accepted it with a small smile. You think of everything. Cale shrugged lightly, his expression calm. The land teaches one to prepare. Without caution, there is no survival. She chewed quietly, the simple food grounding her. Yet as the fire crackled, her thoughts returned to the canyon, his lone figure holding the pass, his rifle steady, his courage unshaken. You were incredible back there, she murmured. One man against so many. I've never seen anything like it. His eyes met hers across the fire. It is not bravery, he said. It is necessity. But still, she pressed, you saved me. Again. Why risk so much for me? For a moment, he was silent. The firelight flickered in his dark eyes. Because you called for help, he said finally. And no one else answered. Emily's breath caught, her chest tightening. She remembered the outlaws' laughter, the way they had stripped her of dignity. She remembered calling out in desperation, and Cale stepping from the shadows, offering her not just protection, but respect. I don't know what I would have done without you, she whispered. Cale leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. You would have fought. You are stronger than you know. Her heart thudded, unsure whether his words comforted or frightened her. She hugged her arms around herself, whispering, and if I'm not strong enough? His reply was quiet, but certain. Then I will be strong for you. The fire crackled between them. Emily lowered her gaze, cheeks warm, her fingers tightening around the edge of her skirt. She had known Cale only a short time, yet already she felt a pull toward him, an invisible thread drawing her closer, stronger with each passing moment. The cave seemed smaller than it was, the firelight softer, the silence between them heavier with meaning. Emily wanted to speak, to confess the confusion and gratitude tangled in her chest, but the words refused to form. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you, Cale." He inclined his head, solemn. "Rest now. I will keep watch." Emily lay on the folded blanket he had offered, the warmth of the fire lulling her. But even as her eyes drifted shut, she knew rest would not come easily. For though danger still prowled outside, it was not fear that filled her heart. It was the dangerous, undeniable spark of something she had never expected to feel for an Apache warrior who had saved her life. And as the night deepened, Cale sat watchful beside the fire, his gaze often flicking toward her, guarding not only her body, but perhaps, though he did not admit it yet, his own growing heart. The fire below flickered bright against the twilight, casting jagged shadows of the three outlaws across the hollow. Their laughter rose like an ugly chorus, coarse and mocking, and Emily's stomach twisted as she clutched Cale's blanket tighter around her shoulders. She recognized their voices, the same jeers she'd heard when they stole her clothes. Every word reminded her of her shame. Cale crouched at the ridge, his dark eyes sharp as an eagle's. "They are careless," he murmured. "Their horses are tethered. They think no one will challenge them." His jaw tightened. "They are wrong." Emily's breath hitched. The idea of descending into that hollow made her pulse race. "What will you do?" she whispered. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable yet steady. "I will make them afraid. Men like this know only strength." Emily shivered, torn between fear and a strange, unshakable trust in him. I don't want you hurt because of me." Cale shook his head, calm and resolute. "This is not only for you." They dishonored themselves. Their kind spreads fear like sickness. It must end. Before Emily could protest, Cale slipped away into the dusk, moving so silently that she could scarcely believe he was flesh and blood. She crouched low, heart pounding, watching as he melted into the brush like a shadow. The outlaws sat around their fire, passing a bottle, laughing loud enough to wake the hills. One of them pulled her dress from a saddlebag and waved it like a prize. "Prettiest thing we've taken in months," he sneered. The others roared with laughter. And Emily's shame burned hotter than the fire itself did. Then it happened. A sharp cry split the air as one outlaw staggered back, an arrow buried deep in the ground at his feet. Shocked, he spun, searching the darkness. Another arrow whistled past, so close it tore the brim from his hat. "Apache!" One of them shouted, scrambling for his pistol. Panic rippled through the camp as Cale emerged from the shadows, tall and unyielding, rifle in hand. His voice rang like thunder. "Leave the woman's things. Leave your horses. Go and you live." The men hesitated, fear flickering across their faces. But the biggest of the three snarled, spitting into the dirt. "No redskin's gonna tell me what to do." He raised his pistol. The crack of Cale's rifle answered faster. The man's hat flew from his head as the bullet split it clean, grazing just enough to terrify but not kill. The outlaw dropped to his knees, cursing, clutching at his singed scalp. "Next shot is not warning," Cale said coldly. Emily's breath caught. She had never seen such control, such precision. Not wild savagery, but measured, deliberate strength. The other two outlaws backed away, eyes wide, hands raised. All right. One stammered, "We're going." Cale's gaze never wavered. "Drop the clothes. Leave the horses." Cursing under their breath, the men obeyed. Emily watched as her folded dress was tossed near the fire, the fabric dirtied but whole. Her relief was so sharp it nearly brought tears. The men fled into the darkness, stumbling, leaving their mounts behind. The campfire crackled in their absence, the night suddenly quiet again. Cale lowered his rifle but did not relax. He circled once, scanning the shadows to ensure they were gone. Only then did he turn toward Emily, his expression softening slightly. "You are safe now," he said simply. Emily descended from the ridge slowly, her knees trembling. She knelt beside her dress, brushing dirt from it with shaking hands. I don't know how to thank you." Cale studied her, his face unreadable in the firelight. "Do not thank me. Any man with honor would have done the same." Her heart twisted at his words, knowing too well that most men would not. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze, and for the first time she saw not just a warrior, but a protector, someone who had risked himself to restore her dignity. The blanket slipped slightly from her shoulders, and Cale turned away at once, his respect unwavering. Emily clutched it close, cheeks flushing with a heat that had nothing to do with shame. "Cale," she said softly, almost to herself, "you are not what they say." His gaze flicked back to her, and for a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that went deeper than words. The fire crackled. The night stretched wide and silent around them, and Emily realized her journey westward had changed forever. The fire burned low, its light flickering across the hollow where Cale had reclaimed Emily's dignity. Her dress, though wrinkled and dirt-stained, lay neatly folded beside her. She held it close, fingers trembling as she smoothed the fabric. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. I should change back into it." Cale gave a single nod, stepping back into the shadows, his broad frame turned deliberately away. "I will keep watch." Emily's throat tightened. Few men she had known would have offered such respect. Her father's ranch hands would have mocked, jeered, even tried to peek. But Cale, this Apache warrior strangers had called savage, gave her more dignity than any townsman ever had. Quietly, she slipped behind a cluster of boulders and changed into her dress. It was torn at one hem and smelled faintly of smoke from the outlaw's fire, but when she tied the last ribbon and stepped back into the clearing, she felt like herself again, or at least as close as she could manage after such an ordeal. Cale glanced at her briefly, then returned his gaze to the horizon. "Better," he said simply. Emily gave a faint, shaky laugh. "Better, yes." She hugged herself. "I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't come." "You would have found a way," Cale replied, his tone certain. "You have spirit." She tilted her head, startled. "You think so?" He studied her with calm eyes. "Fear shakes you, but it does not break you. Many stronger than you would have hidden in the creek until dark, waiting for death. You called for help instead." Emily felt warmth spread through her chest pride and something else she dared not name. She lowered her gaze, murmuring, "Still, I'm grateful." Cale did not answer, but the faintest flicker of a smile touched his lips before it disappeared. They gathered what they could from the outlaws: abandoned camp food scraps, a blanket, and the horses they had left behind. Cale moved with quiet efficiency, securing supplies while Emily busied herself brushing ash from her skirt. At last, Cale spoke. "The men will return with others. Their shame will drive them. We must move before sunrise." Emily's heart thudded. "Where will we go?" "South," Cale replied. "I know the land. Canyons, streams, places they will not dare to follow." She hesitated, glancing at him. "And you mean to take me with you?" His dark eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. "You cannot walk alone. Not after this. You would not reach the town before they found you again." Emily's breath caught. She wanted to argue, to insist she could manage, but deep down she knew he was right. The thought of the outlaws circling back filled her with dread. And Cale, though she had known him only hours, had already proven himself more dependable than any man she had ever trusted. "Then I'll go with you," she whispered. He gave a single nod, then turned back to the campfire, kicking dirt over the flames until the last embers died. The night seemed darker without the fire, But Emily felt oddly safe walking beside him. They set out under the stars, her mare following quietly while Cale led one of the stolen horses. The land was hushed, broken only by the chirp of crickets and the crunch of their steps. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, unable to hold her curiosity, Emily asked, "Cale, do you always help strangers?" He glanced at her, the faint starlight catching his features. "No, but you are not the first woman they have wronged. Too many are left with no one to stand for them. Tonight I chose to stand." Her throat tightened at his words. She wanted to ask more about his life, his people, his reasons, but something in his tone told her he was not ready. So instead, she whispered, "Then I'm glad you chose me." Cale didn't answer. But as they walked into the vast silence of the desert night, Emily felt the invisible thread between them draw tighter, binding her fate to his dot, and somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard the echo of hoofbeats reminding her that danger still lingered on their trail. The day had been hotter than most, with the relentless western sun burning down on the scrubland until the very air seemed to shimmer. Emily Whitaker wiped her brow as she led her mare toward the small creek she had discovered the day before. She had been traveling alone for nearly a week, determined to reach the small settlement where her uncle lived, and the solitude was starting to wear her down. Dust clung to her skin, her hair felt heavy, and the promise of cool water was a blessing she could no longer ignore. She tied her mare beneath a mesquite tree and stepped down the shallow slope toward the creek, smiling when she heard the gurgle of water. Here, away from the trail, she felt safe enough to rest. She laid aside her satchel, folded her dress neatly, and slipped into the water with a sigh of relief. For a few moments, the world felt merciful again, the heat of her journey, easing as the current wrapped her in coolness. But the peace didn't last. She froze when she heard the crunch of boots on dry soil above her. Male voices low, harsh, careless. Emily ducked lower in the water, her heart hammering. Through the reeds, she glimpsed 3 rough-looking outlaws, their laughter cruel and mocking. One of them bent over her belongings, holding her dress high like a trophy. Well, what have we here?" One sneered. "Lady Whitaker's gone for a swim," another cackled. "Reckon she won't be needing these no more." Emily's blood ran cold. She wanted to scream, to demand they return her clothes, but fear sealed her throat shut. The men jeered, bundled her garments, and walked off without so much as a glance toward the water where she trembled. Their laughter carried long after they disappeared into the brush. Emily pressed her face into her hands, trembling with humiliation. Alone, half hidden by the creek, she felt utterly exposed. The sun was beginning to dip, and the thought of being stranded without clothes, vulnerable to wild animals and worse men, filled her with dread. That was when she heard it, a sound different from the coarse laughter of outlaws. A soft step, the faint jingle of metal. Her head snapped up, panic flaring anew. An Apache warrior stood at the edge of the creek, tall and still as carved stone. His dark eyes fixed on her, though not with the mocking hunger of the outlaws. He carried himself with a calm strength, a rifle slung across his back, a blanket folded over one shoulder. His face was unreadable, but his presence was overwhelming. Emily gasped, clutching the water to her chest as though it could shield her. "Please don't." The words caught in her throat, half plea, half warning. He raised one hand, palm open in a gesture of peace. His voice was deep, steady. "You are safe. I will not harm you." Her heart thudded wildly. They took my clothes," she whispered, the shame burning her cheeks. The Apache inclined his head once. Without another word, he unfastened the blanket from his shoulder and set it down on the bank, deliberately looking away from her as he did so. The simple act stunned her. No mockery, no smirk, only dignity. Gathering her courage, Emily crept from the water and wrapped herself in the blanket, clutching it tightly around her. The fabric smelled faintly of smoke and sage. She dared a glance at him. He stood a few steps away, gaze fixed on the horizon, as though determined to give her the privacy she so desperately needed. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice small but sincere. He finally looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw something unexpected, not pity, but respect. "The men who did this," he said, his tone quiet but firm, "they will pay." Emily swallowed hard. Alone, she would have been lost, helpless, humiliated, afraid. But in this moment, wrapped in an Apache warrior's blanket and held steady by his calm presence, she felt something else stirring deep inside her. Not just relief, but trust. Perhaps even the faintest flicker of hope. And that was how it began. The strangest, most dangerous alliance she could have imagined. Emily tightened the blanket around her shoulders, feeling both humbled and uneasy. She had been raised to fear the Apache people. Her father had called them raiders, savages, merciless enemies of settlers. Yet here stood one, not only protecting her modesty but offering a vow to punish those who had wronged her. The world seemed upside down, and she didn't know whether to run or to cling to him. The warrior moved closer, but with deliberate caution, as though wary of frightening her further. He gestured toward her mare still tied beneath the mesquite. "Your horse is safe. You are safe for now. But those men will return. You cannot remain here." Emily's throat tightened. I can't go to town like this. Not like this." She glanced down at the blanket that barely covered her. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I will find what they stole." His gaze hardened like flint. "They laughed at your suffering. That is dishonor. I will not allow it." Emily swallowed, torn between disbelief and gratitude. "But why help me? You don't even know me." The Apache's lips pressed into a line. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with quiet conviction, he replied, "A woman should not be left shamed. My people believe in honor. That is enough." His words struck her in a place deeper than fear. Honor, respect, words she hadn't expected from a man her father's world had painted as dangerous. Slowly, Emily nodded. Then, "Thank you." He crouched near the ground, scanning for tracks where the outlaws had disappeared. Emily noticed the sharp precision of his movements, how easily he read the land. Every snapped twig, every displaced stone told him a story. He was like a hawk, silent yet alert to everything. "3 men," he murmured, pointing to the trail. "1 tall, heavy, 2 lean. They head west." Emily hugged the blanket tighter. "West, toward the canyon road. That's where I came from. If they ride far enough, they'll reach Dry Creek Town." His eyes narrowed. "Then we must move before they vanish in the crowd." The words "we" sent a shiver through her. Was she truly about to follow an Apache warrior into the wilderness? She had little choice. Alone, she would never survive. With him, she had a chance, not only for her clothes, but for her dignity. "Wait," Emily said softly. "I don't even know your name." He studied her as though weighing the wisdom of sharing it. At last he answered, "Kale." She whispered it, testing the sound. "Kale." His gaze lingered on her for a moment, and though his face remained stern, there was something steadying in his presence. Something that eased the terror coiled inside her chest. They moved quickly. Kale led the way, his steps silent as a shadow, while Emily followed, clutching the blanket like armor. Her mare walked behind, its reins in Kale's hand. Despite the awkwardness of her state, she felt strangely secure knowing he was near. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon with blood-red streaks. Twice Kale halted, crouching to study the ground, pointing out signs she would never have noticed: boot prints pressed deep in soft earth, a shred of cloth caught on a thorn, the faint smell of smoke drifting on the breeze. Emily found herself whispering, "You see everything." He didn't look at her, but his mouth curved in the barest flicker of amusement. The land speaks to those who listen. As twilight descended, they reached a ridge overlooking a hollow below. There, glowing faintly in the dusk, was a fire. Shadows of 3 men moved about, their voices carrying on the still air. Emily's heart lurched. Cale crouched low, scanning the scene with sharp eyes. "It is them." Emily gripped the blanket tighter. The thought of facing those men again made her stomach knot with dread. But then Cale glanced at her, and in his calm, unwavering gaze she found strength she hadn't known she possessed. "We will take back what is yours," he promised, his voice low but firm. "No woman should be left in shame. Not while I still breathe." For the first time since the outlaw's cruel laughter had echoed through the creek, Emily felt something stronger than fear. She felt courage borrowed from the warrior who stood at her side, and though the fire below flickered with danger, she realized she no longer faced it alone.